Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so delighted to introduce my guest today, Rusty Gaillard. Rusty works at the intersection of high tech and inner tech, helping successful business leaders achieve their next level of success by upgrading their inner technology. From an engineering degree at Princeton to his first job at GE under Jack Welch, to a Stanford MBA, to the worldwide director of finance at Apple, Rusty has walked the traditional path of success. Along the way, he learned that traditional success is not the same as being successful in life. Discovering and building a successful life required upgrades to his inner tech, the beliefs, thoughts, and habits that create his life experience. Those upgrades to his operating system came through challenge and opportunity, a voluntary demotion to spend more time at home, a divorce, and leaving his 25-year corporate career to become a coach. Using a repeatable process to upgrade your inner tech, Rusty now helps others define and achieve holistic success in life on their terms. Rusty has been a student of self-development and transformation for over 10 years and was formally certified with the Brave Thinking Institute in 2018. Please join me in welcoming Rusty Gaillard. Welcome, Rusty.
Thanks, Tammy.
So good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us from your home and office in San Francisco.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
So glad to have you. So, Rusty, as you know, work from the inside out. It's all about the journeys that we've had in our careers and our lives, and you have had quite the journey. I'm so excited to have you here today. Take us back to some of the earlier years, perhaps some of the formative years that led you to where you are today.
Absolutely. In the introduction, you just describes a little bit of my background. It described this traditional path of success that I followed, and that very much was the formative years, the early years for me were about embedding that path of success. I grew up in a very traditional household where my mom stayed home and my dad went to work. He was very successful as a business executive. And he went to work in the morning and he came back and he was always home for dinner, but he worked hard. He would, he could be home for dinner, but then he would go back to work at home with his paperwork. Of course, this was well before the days of personal computing and the internet. So he would be there with his paperwork at night. And so he was a hard worker, but he was very successful and climbed the corporate ladder. He worked at the same company for 35 years.
Wow.
And so that was the model that I had, and that was celebrated, and achievement was celebrated, and success. And so I very much was on this path of achievement or path of success. And that's where I started out. So I did very well. I was, fortunate that I did very well in school. So I was always at the top of my class in high school and also in college. And just assumed that was this path of success that I would be on. And having grown up in this family where, my dad was very successful in business, I thought naturally that I would be the CEO of a big company. That just seemed logical to me. It's like, well, hey, that's what successful people do. And I can do that. So that's what I will do.
Right. So it was just the assumption. I mean, there really wasn't a lot of question in your mind. You just thought, if I follow the formula, that's where I'll land. Yeah,
it really was. And it's fascinating because, as a coach, I talk to a lot of people and, I ask them, where do you get your models for success? Like, for the templates of what does success look like in life? And what does your path look like? And what are the next steps you're taking and so on? And so many people, their response to that is from their family. Either their family directly or perhaps from their in-laws. Maybe there's a special teacher that informed them. But it's very largely about, well, these were kind of my family values is often the response I get.
Right.
And so it's been so interesting for me personally to reflect on my own path of success that I followed, but other people to hear theirs as well, which is, this is just the assumption of first I go to college and then I get my job and then I get promoted and then I get married and I have kids.
Right.
And it's just it's pretty, formulaic.
It's linear, right?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of, I actually just finished the manuscript for my first book, and I have a chapter in there that says careers are not linear and success is not a destination, right? But yet I think many of us were raised with that model, and it was partly from our families. I think it was societal too, though, that there is this notion that you go to school, whether it's, from when I grew up, I don't think the assumption was that everyone went to college. I think it is today that most people go, but there was the assumption that you get an education. And from there, that leads to some kind of line of work, career, profession. And from there, you build on that. And then you build your expertise. And you either become, higher up in your profession, or you become a business owner, and you're all set for life. You get your white picket fence, 2.3 children, and you're all set. That's success, right?
Yeah. And for sure. And that was my assumption as well, by the way, kind of growing up in a family like that had those kind of beliefs. And as you said, culturally, it's bigger than just the family. It's part of the culture.
Yeah.
Growing up there, that was my definition of success. And I did find at some point that once I had checked most of those boxes, I found myself in this place of wondering, now what? Or is this it? And even some conflict around it, because one element that I haven't really shared is growing up, my dad was very successful, but I would have loved to have had him a little bit more available to just hang out and play and do kid stuff, right? Like what kid doesn't want to spend more time with their parents? Of course I did.
Yeah.
And my dad was, because he was, he worked very hard and he was driven to be successful in that kind of, external sense of title and position and authority and all of that. And he was. But so, there was a little bit of a trade-off there. And, as a child, I had this sense of, I wish that, when I'm an adult, I'm going to be more engaged and more involved in my family.
So you had those thoughts even as a kid?
I did. And it was reinforced actually in my early 20s. I did a little field assignment for my first job, and I was working with the military. And I went out for a beer one night with this master chief in the military, which is one of the most senior enlisted positions in the Navy. And he'd been in the military for over 20 years, and he was very successful. He had reached the pinnacle of what he could accomplish. And he said to me, hey, if I could do this all over again, I would have put less time into my career and spent more time with my family.
Wow.
So from my own personal experience, and then hearing that from this man, which clearly had an impact 20 plus years ago, I remember that conversation. So those things came together to me. And so it was a little bit of this intersection, or this conflict between this assumption that I would have about the path that I would follow to become CEO of a big company,
right,
and a desire to really be present and engaged in my family in a way that, at a different level than what I had experienced when I was a child.
Yeah. Wow. But it's interesting that you even had those thoughts as a child, that I think a lot of, maybe I'm wrong, but I think of a lot of kids as this is just the way it is. This is the way life is, like I can imagine, when I was little, a lot of moms stayed home with the kids and the dads went off to work. That was not that unusual. I know my mom did work part-time and then went to work full-time when I was maybe 8 or 9 or 10, something like that. And that didn't seem like a big deal. I think I had a bit of an adjustment to it, but but it wasn't, it didn't, none of it seemed questionable. And it's funny because I was the kind of kid who did question things, but it's interesting that you did have those thoughts even at that age.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Well, and ultimately that's what led to what you described as in the introduction as this voluntary demotion. And that was really one of the first times when I felt like these two paths, my personal path of family life and my professional path of career advancement and traditional success, where those two things intersected. Yeah. In a challenging way, because, early in your life, when you're single, it's easy to work as much as you want.
Oh, yeah.
And even when I was married without kids, that was pretty easy to do. Yeah. But, once I just have one child, but once one or multiple children enter the picture, it's a whole different ballgame. Right. And I found myself in this place where I really felt like I was failing at work and at home. Because I'd just been promoted. I was the worldwide director of finance at Apple, and I was leading our forecast for all of the products that we sell globally. So it was a huge responsibility. And Apple's a global company. So that meant working with Europe in the morning, working in the US during the day, and working with Asia in the evening. And that evening time in particular was, it was dinner time and bath time and, bedtime, all of those things that are a big part of the day that I wanted to be a part of. Yeah. And I had this massive conflict around that same time period, being available and engaged in conference calls and meetings and just being present at work. Yeah. And I felt like everything was a trade-off. And I just felt like I was failing in both, wasn't doing well in either place. And came to this decision of really back to this conversation I had, back to this with this man from the Navy, back to this realization I had as a child that if I really believe in that, I got to put my money where my mouth is. Wow. And I was hiring a position on my team, and I decided to take that position and had my boss backfill me in the position that I had been in. So that's how I basically demoted myself, which was, I did it. I did not do this gracefully. I did not do it smoothly. It was kind of a mess, to be honest. But, I did.
There's no model for that. There's a model for reaching worldwide director of finance, right? Yeah. There's a model for climbing the ladder. There's not a lot of models for stepping down the ladder.
No.
There's models for stepping off the ladder.
Well, and what you just said is super insightful, because in a way I did step off the ladder, which also became very disorienting. So personally, it was great because now I had a job that was smaller than the job I had been doing. I could easily manage that job. I had a lot of flexibility in my schedule. And so on many respects, personally, it was a great win. Yeah. But I had also really unknowingly stepped off the ladder. And then, for me, my whole path had always been, I'm going to be the CEO of a company. And when I stepped off of that path, there was no path for me anymore. And that became very disorienting after a while. For a little while, it was great. It was like, hey, this is wonderful. I've got free time. I can manage my schedule. I can be home and I can be present, and I'm still working, and I still have a job that I'm good at, and I can manage well. I enjoy the people, and I'm, all of that. So, for a while it was great, but then now what? And so I found that when I stepped off of the path, but I think a lot of people find that when they reach the end of the path of what they expected to do in life. And if you reach that path when you're 30 or 40, it doesn't matter when you reach it, but when you reach that path, then you start asking, what the heck comes next? Right. Because I was just sitting there thinking, I don't want to just sit here in this job for the next 15 years until I retire and just waste that time away. I still want to do something meaningful and productive with my life, but I don't want to do it in a way that I sacrifice the ability to be present and engaged with my family. Right. So what is the path from here?
I have a million questions. So how long had you been doing the higher level role? That just sounds daunting to me. Worldwide Director of Finance at Apple. When you describe that role, I'm just in awe. I can't imagine what that role must have entailed. And then to hear you say you stepped down to something more manageable from that, I'm thinking, I can only imagine that even stepping down from that role was still not a small job.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. It's a fair point. I didn't step into a small job necessarily, but
I mean, from a layperson's point of view, let's say, right? Yeah. Given how big Apple is, big doesn't even describe it. So, so you step down, and I'm thinking he was still in a really big job. So tell us what you stepped down into, and how did you? I mean, I think people would be curious to know how you went about doing that, even if it was messy.
Yeah. Well, so the job that I stepped into was it was a manager. It was a manager level. So I had been a director, and I stepped down to a senior manager level in finance still. Mm-hmm. And I was responsible for more of the analytics and the data and the systems. Mm-hmm. So I was really more of the infrastructure that drives the forecast process. Mm-hmm. And so that was the role that I stepped into, and it was really just through conversations with my boss. He was not happy. Understandably, because I was, making a pretty significant change, and he was counting on me in that role. And he supported me, which I was very fortunate that I did have his support in that.
Yeah.
So it was, as I said, it was not graceful or smooth or easy. It was tumultuous.
For how so though? Say a little more about that. How was it tumultuous? I mean, look, change is tumultuous, period. But I'm curious, in what ways was that tumultuous? Because it's such a different kind of change than what people envision when change occurs.
Yeah, well, I really was tumultuous in two ways. One is that what I was asking for from my boss, he was not happy about giving me. So that was the first piece.
Because he was counting on you to do the director role.
Of course. Right. Yeah. That was my job, and I was in it, and I was doing it.
And he was happy with your performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he didn't want to lose that.
Exactly. And so that was the first level of challenge. That was kind of the external piece. And frankly, the other piece was the internal piece about this conflict between my childhood views about what I wanted, which was to have a dad that was more present, and my expectations and ambitions about my own career, to go on to continue to be successful and continue to grow in the corporate world. Mm-hmm. And those two things, that was an internal conflict.
So that was your internal conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did make a choice on it, but I'm not saying that was an easy decision to come to.
Of course not.
There was a lot of hand wringing and gnashing of teeth of, is this really the right thing? And, do I, because, up until that point in my life, I had been able to do it all.
Yeah.
And so I reached this point where it seemed to me I could not do everything that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that was also part of this tumultuous change of, it just changing my own self-perception in some way.
Yeah. That's huge. That's really huge. Absolutely. So, how long had you been the director when you decided to make that tumultuous?
It was about 2 years.
2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a solid period of time to be in the role. And then you demoted yourself with the blessing of your boss. As difficult as that was, how long did you remain in that demoted role?
Well, that's the interesting thing, is I remained in that role until I left Apple, which was about 8 years.
Wow. So you stayed another 8 years.
I did. And those 8 years, a couple of years into the 8 years, I knew I wanted to do something else.
Yeah.
And I started off by looking around inside the company, and there are interesting things to do, but I really, Apple's an intense company. It's a very successful company, but it's intense. There's a high expectation, and people put in a lot of hours, and people are very committed to the company, which makes it a great place to work. And I did not want to go backwards from the standpoint of the flexibility and freedom that I had in terms of balancing my work and my personal life. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to go back into this role that I was, putting hours and hours and lots of long hours into my job, because that was the whole reason I left my director job in the first place.
Right.
So I didn't want to go back into that position. And so I looked around inside the company. I never found anything that felt like it was going to be moving in the right direction. I ultimately looked outside the company, and everything seemed like more or less another version of what I was doing at Apple. I could go work at another tech company. I could go to consulting. I could go work at a startup, but they all felt like not fundamentally different from what I was doing.
Right.
What's the point of going somewhere else, starting from scratch to do something that I'm basically already doing? None. Right. So that's why I ended up staying there for so long, because I didn't know what else to do. Yeah. I'd reached the end of my path, but the path that I was wanting or looking for was a continuation of the path that I had already been on. And that path I couldn't find. So I really was in a holding pattern for a period of time. And that's where I got to this questioning of, am I just going to be here until I retire? Wow. And that was that was a little bit of a depressing thought, which is, Apple's a great company. I had a wonderful job. I was paid well. It was stable. There were so many good things. And I wanted to do something that I could feel more engaged in and more passionate about, and just have a better personal alignment with the work that I was doing, because we all spend so much of our life at work. I didn't want to spend all of that time treading water, if you will, kind of standing still. Yeah. And I believe that that's a place where a lot of people get to in their career, right? They get near the end of their path. You're preaching to the
choir here, Rusty. Yep.
And they say, what's next? And so, when I talk about inner technology, it's really it's the kind of questions we ask. It's what we think is possible. It's really about kind of how our perspective on the world. Because at that point, my perspective on the world was, again, informed by my experience in life to date, was I work at a big company and I have a job at a large company. I get a paycheck. And, that's the kind of person I am. So the idea of being a coach or a teacher or anything like that wasn't even on the radar screen. So when I was looking at other jobs, like it didn't even come up as an idea.
Yeah. It wasn't even on the landscape of what was possible.
Right. Exactly. And that is such a great reflection of inner technology. Is like, what do you think is possible and not possible? Because that right there, it's different from person to person. And what you think, Tammy, and what I think, I'm sure are different. And that's just a reflection of our own operating system. It's how we were programmed. It's what we learned. Yeah. And it's changeable. And that's the thing that I just get so fired up about these days, which is, hey, all of the limitations that you think are placed on you in your life, those limitations are internal. They're things that you have learned to expect to be a limitation. And if you expect it to limit you, it will limit you.
Right. Right.
And that is something that's changeable. So that's the process I've been through as I've found this new path towards being a coach.
So how did you come upon this notion of inner tech, and what occurred at the end of that 8 years, or when did you realize, I keep hitting this brick wall. There's really nothing I'm finding out there that's different enough from where I am now. I'm feeling stuck. So what changed for you?
Yeah. So there's, I'm going to back up a little bit in the story, because there's another element of this, which is a personal element, which is during those 8 years when I was in that job, I got divorced. And the divorce was challenging. Any divorce I think is challenging.
Absolutely.
Because it's, I had also described most of my life, I saw myself as largely successful in life, achieving and accomplishing what I wanted to. Mm-hmm. And divorce clearly was never part of my plan. I don't think it's part of anyone's plan.
No.
And so it was, for me, even more so than the job thing, it felt like the biggest failure that I had ever had in my life.
Sure.
And that really challenged me. The other element that kind of came with the divorce was recognizing that I really didn't have anyone in my life I could talk to about what was going on. Growing up in my family, we were externally oriented. So we were focused on what's going on around us and success and moving forward. And we didn't talk about our internal experience. especially all those feelings you might label as difficult or challenging, like fear or anxiety or failure. Any of those things we didn't really talk about. So I didn't talk about it growing up. I didn't talk about it with my friends. I found myself going into this divorce with no one to talk to.
Wow.
And that just was not sustainable. I had a therapist and that was fine, but it's not the same as having a community and friends.
Right.
So I built that, and I built that community, and I really did it with other men. And that's been something that's just been transformative in my life. And it's been so powerful and beautiful to have a community of men where I can talk about my life and share with them what's going on with me. So that was something that kind of came from the divorce process. And the moment that these two paths intersected, the career path and this personal path about talking to people, was I was listening to a speaker, and the speaker was challenging my inner technology, challenging my operating system, saying, most of us, all of us really, have assumptions about what we think is possible. And we have constraints. And she said, what if money were not a constraint in your life? And what if your past experience were not a constraint? And what if what other people thought was not a constraint? What if none of those things, your time, your age, who your network, what if none of those things constrained you? What would you love to do with your life? Mm-hmm. And the idea just came to me almost instantly. I would love to have more of these meaningful and deep conversations with people, because that had been so powerful for me during this divorce process and beyond, that I just said, I would love it if that were my life. And that, that went quickly to, well, could I be a therapist? And I didn't want to go back to school and practical hours and all that stuff. I said the hurdle's way too high on that. But I could do this in a meaningful way to help people move forward in their lives, because it's been transformative for me. I would love to pass that forward to other people. And that's, it was really in a moment, the idea came to me, and it was the moment of stepping out of my existing operating system. And if I could step out of it for a moment, then I got this little glimmer of an idea, said, well, hey, I could go in that direction. And then in the moving in that direction, started to shift all of my beliefs and assumptions about what's possible.
Wow. I'm curious, do you remember who that speaker was who posed those questions, and it was kind of that turning point for you?
Absolutely. Yes. Her name is Felicia Searcy. And I remember where, I'm sure we all have these experiences, but I remember where I was. I can picture it. I can see the scene. I mean, it touched me in such a way that I think it's one of those events that I'll never forget.
Wow. Yeah. No, I agree. I think I'm not the only one who calls these things this, but kind of call those defining moments. But it really was, it was sort of it was almost like a spark plug that was sparked. You had already been working on that, and it just kind of brought it all together, right?
Yeah, it did.
But there's more to your story from there, because you clearly went on to do more from there.
I did. Well, and that was the spark. I love that analogy, the spark plug. And I moved from there into, my first step was to explore and, figure out what is the path. But that happened, in a week or two. It was very quick. And I decided I wanted to be a coach. And I signed up to get trained and certified as a coach. But just like any kind of move, it was scary.
Yeah.
I was in the middle of this divorce. We were going to trial. I was being put on the witness stand. I mean, it was ugly. And, I was in the middle of all this. I'm working full time. My son is with me part-time. So I felt like my life was full. And there was a part of me that said, you're crazy to add coach certification and training on top of that. Like, this is not the right time in your life. And, I've just come to appreciate that opportunities don't always come when they're convenient or easy. But there is a tremendous power in saying yes to the things that call you forward in life. And so I just said yes. And I said, I don't know exactly how this is going to fit into my life, but it's important to me, and I'm going to prioritize it, and it will fit. And it did. And I went through it, and it was great. And, but in a way, a very similar thing happened 6 or 9 months later, after I had finished the certification process and I had started my business, and I was ready to say, I want to invest more of my time in this. So I'm going to leave my job at Apple. And once again, there's a huge part of me that roars up and says, are you crazy? What are you thinking? Why would you leave this job that's stable and you got a paycheck and benefits and you're an expert at what you do and you have a team and you like the people and all of these things, and to go from an expert to being a beginner, and to walk away from the stability and the predictability and all of that. Like, I'm well respected and well known, and now I'm going to be a beginner starting out in this thing and nobody knows me. So there was a huge part of me that said, don't do it.
You're switching to a new operating system that hasn't been tested.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way that's true. But I think this is it's these moments it's like these moments are the test.
Absolutely.
These moments are the test, and either you go forward or you go backwards in these moments.
Right.
But inevitably, when you're wanting to go forward in life, there's going to be a part of you that doesn't want to do it. It's that old operating system that says, this isn't who you are. This isn't the way you work. You don't make decisions like this. This is irresponsible. Why would you do this?
Right.
And all of those voices were in my head at that moment. And, this is true for everybody. It's for all the people I work with, for anybody who's going forward and starting something new. You have some version of that voice. And the question is, what do you do with it? Do you listen to it and go backwards? Or do you say, that's just a part of the process and it's not going to stop me, because where I'm going matters and it's valuable and important to me, and you go forward anyway. Yeah. And that in itself is a huge part of the upgrade process, that decision to move forward.
Right. Absolutely. So that wasn't that long ago, was it?
Yeah, that's right. That was just about a little over 2 years ago.
Wow. Wow. So how's it been going?
Oh, it's great. This was probably 6 months ago or so. Somebody asked, I said, if you move down this path towards what it is that you would love to do in your life, and yes, there's some risk involved, and yes, there's parts of it that are uncomfortable. But if you're moving towards something that you want in your life, you will find yourself a year, 2 years down the road, looking back at your life, and you won't even recognize how yourself back then. Your life will be so different. Mm-hmm. And this person said to me, he's like, well, is that your experience? And it gave me pause for a second. I said, it is. My life is so different now. And it's really just been 2 years, but it's dramatically different. Just in terms of my happiness, my sense of possibility, what I think is, just the scope and the sense of, open turf in front of me, of where I can go and what I can do, is just so much broader and so much greater than it was a few years ago. And I'm happier on a day-to-day basis in what I'm doing.
Wow.
So, and I just believe that when that happens in one area of life, it happens in all areas of life. And the converse of that is when one area of life is not working, that's, that seeps out into all areas of life.
Right.
So, when you're unhappy in one part of life, that tends to impact all of your life. And it's the opposite too. So just finding this path of opening and possibility and upgrade has been just phenomenal in my relationships, my happiness, my health, my work, just in all of these aspects.
Wow. That's inspiring. I love it.
Thank you.
I agree with it too. I think that also speaks to another model that I think many of us grew up with. The model that you put work in one bucket and life in another bucket, like family and even though I know we've been talking about how, I wish I had spent less time on my career and more time with family, as if they're completely separate entities. Yes, there is a separation, but there is some overlap in that when you are happy in your career, when you are enjoying your work, it's different from your family, but it's a part of your life. And so there is a way in which there's a blending between life and work. I recall talking to my parents about their work when I was a kid and seeing how much they enjoyed their work. And so even though their work wasn't a part of our family life per se, it was part of our dinner table conversations. It wasn't like, oh, work is over here in this room, and then we close the door, and then there's nothing that has anything to do with it, at the kitchen table or something. And so I think that there's a way in which, if you look at this whole entity that you have, that you call your life, your work, your career, your livelihood is integrated into that. And so it makes sense what you're saying about that. So tell us, Rusty, what your work is looking like today, what your business is looking like, how it's evolved.
Yeah. So I'm working with, I love to work with successful, high achievers, ambitious people, because they tend to be the people who are moving forward on their path.
Yeah.
And specifically people who find themselves, much like I did, saying, hey, there's something missing here.
Yeah.
Like I've been following the path. It's what everybody expected me to do. It's what I expected to do. And I want more.
Yeah.
And it's really working with them to define what that looks like for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no, leaving your 25-year career to go start your business, like that was my path. That doesn't have to be anyone else's path.
Right.
I have no assumption about what's right or wrong for someone,
right,
other than to work with them to tune into what they would love their life to look
right,
like.
Right. Right.
And I love what you said about, this assumption that work and life are separate, like work
right,
and family and work and pleasure are separate
right,
things.
Right.
That's very much a societal norm or expectation.
Right. Right.
And there's others of those too. Like, you can't get paid to do work you love.
Oh, yes. Yes. All right.
Yeah.
If you love it, it's got to be more of a hobby. Or a leisure activity. And why would you, if you get paid to do it, that will ruin it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, is fascinating. And there's no right or wrong in any of this, but just to recognize that every choice we make, every belief we hold has an impact. And this is why I talk about it as an operating system, because it's like software. It's just that you put this input in and you get that output out. And it's the same thing as when you believe that you can't get paid to do work you love, then that will always be true for you.
Yeah.
Fine. If that's what you want, great.
Right.
But if you would love to get paid to do work you love, like if that idea is interesting or inspiring to you, and of course there's a part of you that doesn't believe it. We all have that.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're willing to lean into it, that could be an upgrade.
Right. And that's what keeps people stuck. I mean, I think that there are people who genuinely, believe, and you can't talk them out of it, that if they were to do what you did, walk away from a 25-year career and hang up a shingle, that they would be not only ruining their lives, but somebody else's life too. And they're not living in the land of possibility. Now, that said, for some people, for whatever reasons, that may not be their best choice, as you also said. There's lots, but I think when you don't even give yourself the chance or the opportunity to think about what else is possible, what other options are out there, you're doing yourself a big disservice. Or if you're not really giving yourself the chance to even connect with your unhappiness, to even examine it, there's a problem. There's a real big problem.
Yeah. And in fact, Tammy, I'm thinking about one of my clients who was in a very similar situation to the one I was in. He happens to work at Google and very successful, but he was working like crazy and, doing email and never catching up, always behind, up late at night, trying to catch up, all that kind of thing. And, through the work that we did together, initially what he said was, I've always wanted to start my own business. I would love to be an entrepreneur. And so we started down that path. And in fact, he started a nonprofit. And so he launched that. But also through the work that we were doing, to find time to start a nonprofit, that time had to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, I don't want to take it out of family time because that's important. And so we worked on how do you take that out of your work hours, the hours that he had been dedicating to work. So we took that out to start this nonprofit. But he also then said, well, hey, I can do that. I also want to get in better physical shape, and I really love playing tennis and golf. And so he started building that into his schedule. So he took 10 hours out of his work week, and he reallocated that to things that mattered to him.
Wow.
And in doing so, he not only was happier personally, because now he was doing things that he wanted to do, he was actually more effective at work.
Yeah.
He said, and this is, I think, is just so magical. It's like, who can imagine by spending less time, you're more effective?
I can imagine that, actually. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
And it's true. But then the beauty of all of this is he still has a desire to start a company, but he hasn't done it yet. And he's not in such a hurry. Yeah. Because he's not so unhappy, because of his whole outlook, as you said, is different, which is, I know it's there for me. I know I can start it when I'm ready to do it. Right. But I have a choice, and at the moment, I'm not ready to start a new company. Yeah. And so he's engaged in his work at Google, but he's doing it in a way that works for him. He's happier at his work because of the way he's approaching his work and his flexibility to make choices that work for him. Mm-hmm. And so he has a whole new outlook on life, a new operating system, if you will, in terms of how he's operating in his work and in his personal life, and his overall level of satisfaction and happiness in life is gone up.
Well, I have a feeling that you're going to have to be putting some boundaries or limits even around your practice, if you haven't already, because what you're offering, and I love the metaphors and the context in which you're talking about all this. And of course, you're in a part of the country and in a part of the world where speaking to it in the way that you are is going to make it very accessible for a lot of people who relate to talking about technology. Mm-hmm. So if you're not already doing so, be ready to have to find either associates to pass other clients on to, or put the brakes on somehow. I just can't imagine that people aren't going to be hearing about you sooner or later. Maybe they already are. I don't know if you're turning people away already, but.
Well, thank you for saying that, Tammy. And I'm just so energized about this idea, because, we're all the product of our operating system, our beliefs and our assumptions about the way the world works. Yeah. And everybody wants more in life. And that's not a bad thing. That's normal, right? It doesn't matter how successful you are, how rich and wonderful your life is. We can all imagine even another level beyond that. And that's just life, I believe. That's part of being human. Right. That's part of growing and learning and expanding. And I celebrate that. And I just love supporting people in it. So, for me, I've lived in that place, as I said, 8 years in the same job, which was not miserable, but it was also feeling stuck. Yeah. Yeah. And I just have this real desire to support people in that. Yeah. And I will say in particular, I have a desire to support men in that, because I believe so many men don't talk about this, don't have someone to talk about it except maybe their spouse. Yeah. And so just to have an environment and have other people where you can just challenge some of these beliefs and challenge them in yourself. Yeah. And give yourself the opportunity to grow and learn. It's been invaluable to me. And I love it. I have a real passion about sharing that with others.
I love it. And is most of your practice working one-on-one, or are you offering groups, or?
So my practice is primarily one-on-one right now. Yeah. I do have a group for people that I've already worked with one-on-one, and I've got a group that I'm running. And, but as you talked about, as more people hear about this and as it expands, I'm definitely introducing groups, and, I've got all sorts of ideas about how to expand this, because for me, this is about touching people and helping them to see a broader and bigger perspective and potential in the world.
Yeah. Well, this is very exciting, Rusty. If you had to give somebody one piece of advice that, let's say they're feeling stuck, or they're trying to figure out one step they can take to figure out what's next, what would be a key piece of advice you would offer?
So the biggest piece of advice that I would offer is, and this is always where I start with my clients, is to invest some time imagining what you would love your life to look like. Mm-hmm. But before you do that, you have to be willing to carve out 5 minutes, 10 minutes, some period of time to push pause on your old operating system.
Yeah.
Which is all of the beliefs and assumptions and limitations that we all have about what we think is possible. So you just have to deliberately say, I'm just going to blow all those things up for 5 minutes. I'll pick them up again in 5 minutes. That's fine. But for these next 5 minutes, at least put them down and just think about what if money were not a constraint?
Right.
What if, in fact, you could get paid to do what you love?
Right.
What if it were easy? What if your life and your work blended together in a seamless and easy way?
Right.
What if it weren't hard?
Right.
What if your friends and family celebrated you for this rather than, questioned you for it? So just all of these things that most of us can get held back by.
Right.
To set those down for a moment and just really deliberately be as expansive as possible to tune into yourself internally about what it is that you feel called to do in your life.
Right. That's great advice. Great advice. Rusty, thank you so much for being here today. How can people find you and learn more about your work and be in touch with you if they'd like to be?
Absolutely. The two best places are my website, which is svdreambuilders.com. That stands for Silicon Valley Dream Builders. So svdreambuilders.com.
Nice.
Or on LinkedIn, Rusty Gaillard. And you can find me there on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. So those are the two best places to connect with me.
Wonderful. So that will all be in the show notes, folks. You will be able to find Rusty very easily. This has been expansive, this conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here, Rusty.
Thank you, Tammy. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Rusty Gaillard. It was so interesting to speak with him about his professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at www.tammygoularloeb.com. Just look for episode 127. Are you thinking about what your next professional move is going to be? Maybe you're just feeling a little stuck. Get specialized group and individualized support, insights, and accountability from a brilliant mix of professional women in a safe, non-judgmental creative space. Join one of my small hybrid mastermind coaching groups, starting on a rolling basis. You can learn more at https://bit.ly/navigating career change. If you were inspired by this episode with Rusty, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd so appreciate your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. I'd love to hear how it's going for you. Feel free to drop me a line. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.